Speaking of playoffs, after just giving my NFL playoff predictions, I kind of wanted to transition to the college side of it and talk about the college football playoffs. We just had a tremendous semifinal round. I guess tremendous is not the best word because we had LSU just completely boat race Oklahoma, but then at least we got a good game out between Clemson and Ohio State. Now, with Oklahoma getting blown out of the college football playoff, that inevitably is going to make a lot of people say, hey, we need an 18 playoff. Oklahoma should not have been there. This is a great example why we need an 18 playoff. And now I'm staunchly against that. I thought 4 is kind of the right number. I think some years 2 would be perfect. And obviously you're not going to have a rotating, this year we're going to have 2, next year we're going to have 4, next year after that we're going to have a 16 playoff. But I'm always a big fan of getting the best teams in there. Yeah, it's great in college basketball to get, Loyola Marymount Loyola into the Final Four, or George Mason in there, but they're truly not one of the elite 4 best teams. They just had a good run and they get to the Final Four and usually they get blown out. So I'm not a huge fan of an 18 playoff because, yeah, Oklahoma got blown out by LSU, but pretty much anybody else was going to get blown out. We saw who was the next guy. Georgia was 5th. They just got blown out by LSU in the SEC championship game. Would Oregon have done better than Oklahoma? Probably, but they lost 2 games compared to Oklahoma's 1. Baylor or whoever. It doesn't matter because LSU was going to blow out no matter. We don't know. Maybe Oklahoma would have done better against Ohio State or Clemson. We don't know that because they didn't get a playoff. So I think just because Oklahoma got blown out doesn't mean we need an 18 playoff because I don't think it matters as much. But for the sake of this, I wanted to take a look at what this year would have looked like if there was an 18 playoff. So basically, if we do get an 18 college football playoff, it's going to be your 5 power conference champions, the number 1 group of 5 team, and then 2 at large. So LSU is the SEC champ, Oklahoma is the Big 12 champ, Clemson the ACC, Oregon the Pac-12, and Ohio State the Big 10. Memphis is your group of 5 team with Georgia and Baylor. And I did this based off of the playoff teams' rankings. And so I basically took the top 7 and then threw in Memphis there. So if we rank those, we have number 1 LSU versus number 8 Memphis. LSU's just completely boat racing them. If they boat raced Oklahoma, they're even double boat racing Memphis. And that's nothing against Memphis. It's just LSU is elite. So then we go 4 versus 5. That's Oklahoma versus Georgia. I think that's I'm not a huge Georgia fan. I think, I know they played well in their bowl game. I don't think they're as good as a lot of people thought that they were. Thought that they were. But for the sake of this argument, I have Georgia beating Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, Georgia, we have Georgia moving on. We have number 3 Clemson versus number 6 Oregon. That would be a fantastic matchup. I'd love to see that game. I just think after what we saw against Ohio State, Clemson would win that game and move on, beating Oregon. And then number 2 versus number 7, Ohio State versus Baylor. I think Ohio State's going to cruise in that game. Baylor was had tremendous success this season. Matt Rule did a tremendous job coaching, but what we've seen over the course of the year when they played tougher teams, they lost Oklahoma twice. They didn't look, they struggled at times. They struggled in their bowl game against Georgia. I think Ohio State would move on. So that moves on to the second round. We have LSU versus Georgia. We just saw that in the SEC championship game. LSU cruised past them. I don't see that any different. So LSU goes to the national championship game. And then we have Clemson versus Ohio State. What we just saw in the semifinal game, I'm assuming Clemson moving forward. So in all this extra steps, we have LSU versus Clemson for our national championship game. No different than what we already had with a 4-team playoff. And that's this year. There's clearly 3 elite teams in college football, and I thought no matter if it was an 14 playoff, 18 playoff, 16-team playoff, those 3 teams would find their way to matching up with each other. Now, does that say it's going to be like that every year? No, you might have the 6 seed be just as good as the 3 seed. But that being said, what's the purpose of having an 18 playoff when you're trying to find your true champion? Yeah, you may get an upset and that may be great, but I want to see the top elite teams play against each other. And this year was great just because we got to see that Clemson and Ohio State game, and now we get to see a tremendous LSU versus Clemson game. Keep it the way it is. Leave it at 4. I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah, conferences get left out, but I don't think we've truly had a team get left out that was probably going to win the national championship. So just keep it the way it is.